Spoštovani cenjeni gosti, spoštovane kolegice in kolegi, drage študentke in študenti, dobrodošli na ciklusu predavanj in okrogli mizi Odprt dostop v humanistiki, ki ju Filozofska fakulteta organizira v okviru letošnjega že 9. sejma akademske knjige Liberak. Ker je današnje srečanje mednarodno, dovolite, da nadaljujem v angleščini. Dear distinguished guests, dear professors, dear colleagues and students, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you at the Faculty of Arts of the University of Ljubljana. This international gathering about open access in humanities is organized as part of the annual academic book fair, which our faculty has been organizing since 2009. A few weeks ago, I published my latest scientific article in one of the highly rated American sociological journals. Of course, I was extremely happy. More than 2 years long process of reviewing and rewriting this article has been finally over. Furthermore, because of the publication of this article, I have gained a considerable number of points in the Slovenian Research Information System SICRIS. The more points I have, the better are the chances that my next research project will be funded. Yes, this is part of the publish or perish system, and I'm sure all of you are very familiar with it. However, before this article was published, I had to go through an online questionnaire provided by the publishing house. First, I had to give up all my copyrights for this article for good. Also, I was offered open access to the article for 2,200 euros, tables in color for 950 euros, 25 off-prints for 200 euros, and poster for the article for 50 euros. Of course, I didn't pay those 2,200 euros, but in 2 years' time, we will have to. According to the National Strategy of Open Access to Scientific Publications and Research Data in Slovenia, all articles and research data derived from nationally funded research will have to be published in the form of open access. Now, it is likely that such an expense will be an eligible cost in the project, but there is something fundamentally wrong with this logic. We will do our research using public money, and then we will spend some more public money to pay the private publishing businesses to make our work openly available to public, which has paid for it in the first place. Is there an alternative? What is an open access in the humanities and how does it work? What are the disadvantages and advantages of open access and what are its challenges? These are some of the questions that we aim to answer today with the help of our distinguished guests. I wish you all a thought-provoking debate and a pleasant stay at the Faculty of Arts in Ljubljana. Thank you very much.
Spoštovani kolegi, lep pozdrav. Odgovore z organizatorji bomo vodili sekcijo v slovenskem jeziku, kar je namenjena posvetovanje našim domačim, predavatelji pa bodo seveda predavali v angleškem jeziku. V čast mi je, da lahko predstavim prvega govorca, dr. Ernesta Priega z City University of London. Dr. Ernesto Priego je doktoriral iz informacijskih študij na University College v Londonu in kot raziskovalec sodeluje s tamkajšnjim centrom za digitalno humanistiko. Je soustanovitelj in odgovorni urednik spletnega časopisa The Comics Grid, Journal of Comic Scholarship, pionirskega projekta, ki omogoča takojšen odprti dostop do svojih vsebin. Dr. Priego je član različnih mednarodnih akademskih odborov za digitalno humanistiko, njegovi raziskovalni interesi pa segajo na področje stripov, digitalne humanistike, odprtega dostopa, spletnega novinarstva, družbenih medijev, altmetrike, raziskovanja podatkov in znanstvene komunikacije. Da prosim dr. Priega, da nam predstavi svoje predavanje.
Hello. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Can you hear me? I'm very happy to be here. It's very exciting to see such a big interest in open access publishing in the humanities. And we often say open access publishing, but when we say publishing, we also mean open access reading. We mean production and sharing, consumption, learning. So I am an academic and an editor as well, and just like our professor Dean today, my experience has been very similar. It was my first experience in academic publishing was not being able to share the PDF with my own mother, and it was an article about Charlie Brown. I'll be talking about the APC logic. APC stands for Article Processing Charges. So bear with me. This is the question. The goal of this presentation is to give you a sense of the complexities in scholarly publishing and the growth of APCs, again, article processing charges in open access, and the alternatives to this model. It then continues this presentation to discuss one solution that has been collectively created by researchers, librarians, and university staff around the world called the Open Library of Humanities. What motivated the Open Library of Humanities was this question: what is research? Why do we write it? And even though often the answer is to get points, to get assessed, perhaps we should remember that it is really to be read, first of all. So we use scholarship to generate symbolic capital to test the value and the impact of our ideas. We are thinking of the dissemination of work, we're thinking of the preservation of the record, of all the apparatus around publication. We are thinking about the labor of reading as well, and also about, a highly accelerated academy in which sometimes what we want to avoid is reading too much or reading stuff that may not be useful for us. We use publication to perform as well classic roles, but it also helps us to trace the lineage of our ideas, the reception and adaptation through time and across research themes. We have identified what to read, but most importantly also look for symbolic signals about whether or not we should not read something. Scholars can go into a bookshop, pick up a book, and perform activities such as scanning or skimming the table of contents or introduction. And we searched signals that for a work that is not relevant and that would limit our endless potential reading in an age of abundant information. There is a symbolic economy of academic publishing. Researchers produce symbolic prestige identifiable to assessing bodies, which in turn translates into a job that pays remuneration. Legacy publishers are part of this cycle by providing dissemination and enhancement of research in exchange for payment. This cycle does not account for the increasing precarity of academic labor and is based on free labor in exchange for symbolic prestige. Basically, our dean made my presentation for me. The symbolic economy maps onto the larger economy. Libraries, here a bank, because that is how publishers see libraries, as banks, pay publishers to make work available to their research, despite this research being created by the same researchers. The publisher also benefits from unpaid peer review. Have you ever been paid for doing peer review? Extra? Do you get a check? So the publisher benefits from this free labor in exchange for more symbolic academic prestige, worth an estimated how much? 1.9 billion pounds, Great British pounds per annum. That's 1.9 billion pounds per annum. So open access has become a thing, identifiable, an identifiable thing. You will see this logo, the orange logo. And there is a huge variety now, at least limited to 3 types. Other people talk about 4th and 5th types. We have the gold open access model that you may have come across. This is the one that has been offered once you've been accepted to a, or before you get accepted into a legacy publisher, maybe. It is the direct open access route. When you publish something, it is immediately open access. The green route, which is when one publishes in a traditional way in a subscription journal, and one is asked to deposit either the preprint or the accepted manuscript in an institutional repository, usually hosted by a university library. And often embargoes have to be observed. So this is not necessarily the version of record, unless it was published in a gold, through the gold route, right? And often it's available in a repository, but we have to wait 6 months or 12 months or 36 months before that content can be fully available. So many institutional institutional repositories that say they are open access repositories are really repositories of metadata, because the full content is usually available only to people from the same institution, or is not available at all until the embargo passes. And then the bronze model. This is all like the Olympics, as you can see, available on a publisher website, but it is not licensed. There's many journals, particularly in the arts and humanities, that operate in this model. There's also these 2 terms that it's useful to be able to distinguish: the gratis model, when content is free to read, and libre, when it is like software free to reuse. When we are talking about open access, we are talking about free to access, but also free to reuse. So it's not just the freedom to access without having to pay, without having to go through a paywall, but also the opportunity to be able to share it online, to cite it, to reuse images, obviously following good academic practice, but to be able to reuse the content, to send it to your mom. Some large publishers, for example, Hindawi, you may have heard of them, are all open access in exchange for fees, and others vary in their open access provision. Other publishers are dwarfed by the output of Elsevier. As you can see, we will see Elsevier here. Do you need more time to see quickly this? That's the number of articles and proportion of articles with open access copies estimated based on a random sample of 100,000 articles with cross-ref DOI. So this means that we need an infrastructure before we can call it open access. Any articles that do not have a digital object identifier are not even estimated. Many bronze open access or bronze journals that in the arts and humanities publish articles without DOIs, and therefore they disappear from the landscape. They do not exist. Publishing nowadays in a journal without DOIs is almost like, without depositing it later in a repository that will give you a DOI, it's almost like throwing it away. It's really... In this chart, you can see there Elsevier at the very top of the chart. They rely on a high percentage of hybrid and bronze offerings, which means that the same journal will publish paywalled articles, and they offer the option, if the author or institution can afford the fee, to make them open access. So it's not the journal that it's open access, it's just that they offer both routes, so to speak. The majority of their output is still wholly paywall-based and subscription only. So let's think about this, right? It's like simple maths distribution. It's a bit of it's an analogy here in which we have 100 people, I think we are almost 100 here, in a room for a talk, and we all have $10 each. I am speaking for free. The venue needs $50 to cover its staff costs, and there are 40 talks per year. We're in the humanities. The subscription logic will have this model by asking each person to pay 50 cents to hear the talk, as long as you pay. If you don't pay, you can't come in. So if a student that is here or comes to a neighboring university, or a tourist is passing by, or a pensioner that paid taxes all his or her life wants to come to that talk, they can't because they don't have the 50 cents to pay. If they pay, they can get in. Each person can afford half of the talks because of the money that they have. The general public cannot attend. Or they can if they pay a special fee. The open access with an article processing charge logic poses that the speaker, in this case me, I would pay a full fee to speak, to give you my work. But I only have $10. So I need to find the funding somewhere else, if I can. But the general public and all of you can attend. And what I'm going to try to talk about today, which is the consortial logic, open access with a consortial logic, is a communal solution where 5 people attend each talk and pay $10 each. They are very generous, they believe in the commons, and they let anyone else attend for free. Everyone can hear 50% of the talks, including the public, because they cannot go to all of the talks necessarily. We could say, though, that when we are talking about publishing, talks are given in real time, right? So with open access, ideally, anyone who knows about the talks or about the papers could access it. Yeah. So this is how open access looks in a dry funding climate. The fact is, I don't have the $50 to pay for my own presentation. I wish I did, because colleagues in other fields may have it and may have much more than that. So they don't even think about it. So we start thinking, is the venue overcharging? We realize that it is all a question of distribution of funds. The reality is that article processing charges do not work well in the humanities and elsewhere. It is also a myth that they work well in STEM fields. But even though it's true that for some in those fields, it is not an issue, just like some people get paid by the universities to go to conferences in exotic locations, and they don't really think about it, just at the moment of doing the expenses, right? The reality is that not all academics do have this funding. So I am here as an Open Library of Humanities advocate, as an academic and editor that has a journal within this system and who has interceded on behalf of the OLH with librarians with different degrees of success on behalf of the OLH. The OLH is what we call a mega journal, which publishes standalone and collection-based articles, which are gathered into issues, as well as a collection of independent supported journals. So the OLH is one mega journal, and then we have several other journals that are published by the OLH, which is not for profit. It cannot be bought, so it won't be like Mendeley that got bought by Elsevier. And it is collectively funded by a consortium of libraries that pay a small subsidy fee. A lot of partners pay a little to get big results. Other partners that have more resources pay a bit more. All this was possible thanks to the support, again, of funders in the humanities. That's more or less the history of the funding of the Open Library of Humanities. So there's been an ongoing project of what we call flipping journals, journals that used to be published by legacy publishers, that used to be subscription only, that were paywalled, that have come to the realization that both funders and institutions are requiring open access for assessment, and have also realized that the way we do research today requires, as much as possible, a frictionless web, right? And those journals have been flipping from that previous model to the Open Library of Humanities model. An example is that of Glossa, that was a journal published by Elsevier that flipped completely. It raised the question of what is a journal, right? So many editorial boards that have been publishing for many years are literally, or they do feel completely, kidnapped by legacy publishers that will tell them the journal is ours, it's not yours. So who makes the journal, who does the journal, and this is a process of gaining, ownership over our own work. Paradoxically, or perhaps not paradoxically, by giving it away to the commons. We own, we regain our own work by making it legal to share our own work. That includes ourselves as authors. So the subscription model as it exists is this one. A great deal of the money goes into maintaining the stop sign. That's the paywall. It's a system of IPs, of IP filters, detects an IP filter if it comes from a university or not, and paywalls that to moderate access to the content. So that's why if you are here at the university, you may be able to access without any friction some content, from academic journals, but the moment you are in the coffee place nearby or at home, you cannot access it right away. You have to add your credentials, etc. Right? So a lot of that money goes into maintaining that. Systems like the Open Library of Humanities save money by not investing in blocking access. This is the subsidy model of the Open Library of Humanities. Everyone pays a small sum, which goes towards the production costs. They can be direct and indirect, of articles without making any profit because it is registered as a non-profit. The idea is that the system is efficient because it is less expensive than paying for individual subscriptions or even bundles, right? And the librarians belong to the governance group that at the same time decides which new journals or new projects can be admitted. The Open Library of Humanities now has 240 libraries supporting the OLH, and that was just in the first year. There's more now. Every day or every week there's new universities joining. So they pay a small fee, and everyone, no matter where they study, no matter where they work, can access it via the open web. In the website of the Open Library, you can see the listing of all the institutions that are members of the consortium. That's my journal on the third, left to right, which is a journal on comic book studies. And as you can see, we have now 23 journals that are supported by the platform, and those articles are counting. I just published a couple this morning in the hotel. And it's just a wonderful thing as an editor to be able to say we are supported by a consortium of libraries, and we have all the required infrastructure to make this content discoverable, preserved, accessible, citable. More or less the cost, of each article to the Open Library of Humanities per reader is of, I can't even say that sum because it's so minuscule, it's $0.08. Right? So when you think what publishers are charging authors to publish, right? And what really costs per reader, we realize that, they are really joking, right? So some key events in the recent history of the Open Library of Humanities. In February, there's been a new phase of expansion this year. It was supported by Openness, which is a key supporter of this event. In March, the Huddersfield University Press became the first institution to host its journals on the Janeway platform, which the Janeway platform is a typesetting system that was designed by Martin Eve, one of the founders of the Open Library of Humanities. He is a truly Renaissance man, an academic who is a publisher, who is a computer scientist, a programmer, typesetter, everything. So a lot of respect for Martin for having made this possible. And I am I am here today thanks to this new campaign called Empower, which has the idea of really including us academics and editors into the role of advocating for this new fairer way of producing and sharing humanities scholarship. The website is full of advocacy materials that can be downloaded, like this presentation, under a Creative Commons attribution license. And new developments like this one that we consider triumphs, where some universities, like the University of Lorraine, have canceled deals with legacy publishers in order to use that money to support researcher-led initiatives like this one. We must say this is very nice that it is our first French consortium member. So we are really trying to make this, to expand it, go beyond the limits of Anglocentrism, which can be so utterly annoying, in spite of the fact that I appreciate you listening to me in English today. What can you do? Check the websites. We can refer friends. We can talk to librarians. It's tough. My own institution does not subscribe to the Open Library of Humanities, but I think they will eventually. It is very interesting. I think that as authors, something that's very important to do is to start thinking harder about where we submit our work, and try to invert that balance of power, to be empowered, that you as authors are the ones with the power to decide where to publish. They have always told us it's not that way. We celebrate when they tell you that your article has been published, when what it really means is your work is no longer yours. So we have made all these resources available. We are trying to spread the idea that open access is not just for the sciences, that there is an issue about the specificity of all humanities fields, that we do not publish the way other STEM fields do necessarily, at least not in all cases, that there is value in curatorial work, in collection work, that we deal with intellectual content, with third-party material, so many issues that arise from our own subject matter that other fields do not necessarily have to deal with. Why we publish for different reasons as well, even though we all need to be assessed than people in STEM fields. So it is very important that there is a growing movement of humanists, people in the arts and humanities that are interested in the infrastructures that are required to make open access publishing, rewardable and rewarding. Thank you very much. That's my Twitter account if you want to get in touch, and my email. Power to the librarian. We need to work with them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priego. Are there any questions for this interesting presentation? I would have one question. Yes, please. I really liked your presentation. I think it's a great idea. But I come from biomedical field, and there is a problem. In principle, we all support open access and initiatives like this, but when it comes to funding and we apply for the projects, the national funders, the international funders, EU Commission, they will always look for the publications in high impact journals. So how to overcome this gap here? Because, okay, I don't know if there is similar for biomedicine, but if I would publish in this, it would be great. My colleagues could see it freely, but when I would apply for the EU grant or for national grant, the reviewers would say, oh, he published in some obscure online journals, they don't have merit. How to overcome that gap? Do you have any idea?
That's the, how much, 1.9 billion pound question. Indeed, it is what part of open access in the humanities advocacy and open access in general has to be interrogating that whole notion of, as we were discussing, excellence and specifically the impact factor. You may have heard of the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, DORA, in which many institutions around the world have signed and continue signing, requesting that the impact factor is not used for assessment. We know that that is not always the case in practice.
Yeah, that's probably because.
So it is a big issue that requires understanding then that once people that are in positions of seniority, research officers, deans, university officials, policymakers, the more they are aware of what is the value of research and what are the pitfalls of proprietary metrics that are also owned by, in many cases, by the same publishers that have made their living from this system of publishing. Hopefully, we'll start seeing that we will generate more impact over time, but that we cannot keep applying the same proprietary measurements because there is a clear conflict of interest between Web of Science, Scopus, H-Index, Google Scholar, and legacy publishers, right? So the ones measuring are measuring their own content that they want you to publish with them. They are measuring themselves, and by so doing, they are keeping us kidnapped. So it requires strength. Especially we are good academics if we've been proficient in that system, if we have managed to win in that system, it can take a lot to accept that we need a new way, perhaps that is more inclusive and more open. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe we could continue with this discussion after the break when the director of Slovenian Research Agency will also join us, as I heard. So, our next speaker is Pierre Mounier. Je raziskovalec na Pariški School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, kjer se raziskovalno posveča predvsem digitalnemu založništvu v humanistiki in družbenih vedah. Je namestnik direktorja platforme za elektronske vire Open Edition in koordinator projekta Openness, raziskovalnega infrastrukturnega projekta za javno dostopno in transparentno komunikacijo v znanosti, katerega cilj je uvesti načelo odprte znanosti in zagotoviti učinkovito razširjanje ter globalni dostop do rezultatov raziskav v družboslovju in humanistiki.
Good morning, everyone. So my contribution to this discussion would be to say that part of the problems that were mentioned earlier are caused by a lack of or a weakness of infrastructure to support open access policies in the humanities, and particularly in the humanities, because I think that some of the problems that were mentioned are peculiar to STM disciplines and not so much to humanities and social sciences, where we experience a different situation. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect far from that. But the problems, the challenges are different in our disciplines than in STM disciplines, particularly the non-domination of APC model in humanities that was mentioned. It's a little bit hard to talk about infrastructures because, you know, the essence of an infrastructure is to be invisible. So, in fact, in a normal situation, nobody cares about infrastructures because it's invisible. Everything is working. So, at the moment, you are listening to me, you are watching me, but you shouldn't. Because if I can do this talk, it's because there are a lot of infrastructures well functioning behind me that enable me to give this talk. So you should have a look at this desk, you should have a look at the beamer, you should have a look at all the people that makes this possible, which are here. And usually when the people start worrying or being interested about infrastructures, it's because the infrastructures are broken. So if the beamer shuts down, then everyone will turn to the people doing the infrastructure, supporting the infrastructure. So that's my aim for this talk. My message would be to say that in the humanities and social sciences, the situation we experience is a lack or a weakness of infrastructures to support open access policies, and I try to show how. First, I'd like to give you some starting points to think about that, the importance of infrastructures to open access policies in the humanities and social sciences. The first starting point I'd like to mention is a report that was published 3 years ago by Knowledge Exchange. It's a very important report named Putting Down Roots, Securing the Future of Open Access Policies. And the main finding of this report is to say that open access policies in general, in all disciplines, in fact, they rely on the development on a fully functioning open access infrastructure. And the situation is that we don't have yet this fully functional infrastructure. We have what they call a disparate collection of services which are not connected together, which are not working together, and that's why we are in such a difficult situation. Now, if I want to narrow down my scope to the humanities and social sciences, and particularly the humanities, which is the subject of the day, and we are in a part of a 3 days academic book fair, I like to mention the peculiarity of the situation of the book. Knowledge Exchange very recently published another report which is really interesting, which is a landscape study conducted by 3 researchers, Elko Verwerda from OEPEN, Francis Pinter from Knowledge and Latch Research, and Niels Stern from the Nordic Council, to do a landscape study about the situation of open access academic monograph in Europe, and particularly in 8 European countries. So here it's a comparative study. You have the list of the 8 European countries, and you have here the description of their methodology based on data gathering, in-depth interviews, online surveys, and literature review. What did they find? First, they found that there is an important number of open access policies across Europe which are including books in the policy, which are not only about scientific journals, but also about books. So 245 open access policies worldwide, including books or sections of books. The other thing that they found is that there is, at the moment, around 10,000 open access books, monograph titles available globally, in English only, so it's much more if we include other languages. Which means that for the humanities and for the books, something exists. There are a lot of initiatives everywhere to disseminate books open access and academic books open access. So it's not true to say that the humanities are not in the open access movement, that they don't want to be part of the open access movement. It's not true, because many initiatives exist. And at least 200 publishers offer open access options for monograph authors. So something is happening. There is an existence of many policies, remarkable initiatives in all countries. But the other finding that they present in the conclusion of their report is to say that there is a huge diversity of models deeply rooted in national cultures and national systems to support this open access publishing of academic books. So there is money in the system, but there is not one model to support open access. There are a lot of them. OLH, which deals only with Open Library of Humanities, which deals only with journals for the moment, but I know that you have plans for books as well in the future, is one model. But there are a lot of different ones. And here you can see, you cannot see because it's too far, but the PowerPoint will be shared, I expect, on the website, so you will be able to see if the infrastructure is going well. The list of the models they identified, and you can see that there are a lot of those different models implying libraries, implying scholarly societies, implying national authorities, libraries, of course, and other stakeholders to support open access policies. And the important thing that they said is that we must respect this diversity. There is not a silver bullet available worldwide to develop or to implement open access policy regarding research monograph. There is this need of diversity. Why that? It's because when we have a look now at the landscape of open access in humanities and social sciences, we see a huge fragmentation of models and of stakeholders supporting these policies of open access. So I call that a Milky Way, with a lot of small stars everywhere, which are loosely connected, yet, or not connected at all in some times, providing this open access. My organization and 3 other partners, we have conducted a survey funded by the European Commission named Opera's D project, which is almost at its end. And we have done a lot of studies to document that situation and to understand what is the situation of humanities regarding open access publishing, particularly in Europe. We have done a landscape study based on literature review. It's all published on our website, so if you're interested, you can go more into detail about this landscape study that evidence, once again, the fragmentation of the situation. A lot of actors, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of initiatives, but not communicating and not working with each other, in fact. They are all working in their own corner. We have done a survey on publishers or university presses or academic publishing services in libraries or in universities. And we asked them a very simple question. What is the software that you use to publish open access, your books and your journals? And here you see the huge diversity of technical solutions. That's an example, that's an illustration of this fragmentation. We don't have a dominant publication system, but there are a lot of them. We have done a technical mapping, asking them for their IT resource, the IT resource that they mobilize for doing this open access publishing. And here again, we see that each of them has very small resources to support this policy. And what now, the next question is, what is the consequence of this situation of fragmentation of the Milky Way? So knowledge enlarged research has done inside our project a specific study about the visibility of open access monographs in a European context. They have done something very simple. They took books published on specific platforms from 5, I think it was 5 partners, okay, on 5 platforms, And they studied what is the visibility of those open access books in information systems such as EBSCO, WorldCat, Google Scholar, and other main indexing venue for content. And what they found is that due to the lack of adoption of the same standards and the lack of coordination between the different platforms, the visibility of the open access monographs is very uneven. This is the findings of this research. The metadata held and managed by Opera partners is inconsistent and variable in quality. Visibility, books in catalogs varies by publisher. So you have all the other findings showing that there is a lack of a common infrastructure, as the knowledge exchange report mentioned, to support an even and good and well-functioning visibility of the open access monographs published by those partners. So here's the situation now. And now here's our proposition, the proposition of the project that I coordinate. Our proposition is to set up a distributed research infrastructure for open scholarly communication in social sciences and humanities across Europe, to connect the stars and to go together and to speak with one voice and to work together to improve our services. As I said, the situation in STEM, in science, technique, and medicine disciplines, and in SSH is rather different. In STM disciplines, the publishing landscape is rather dominated by a few number of big commercial publishers. In SSH, it's different because Elsevier, for example, is not so much present in SSH, and particularly in the humanities. It's the same with Springer, with some differences with Wiley and with others. But as I said, the publishing, and particularly the open access publishing, is taken in charge in SSH by very small, publicly funded, in many cases, initiatives, supported by libraries, institutions, and so on. So do you know that, for example, in the DOAJ, Directory of Open Access Journals, when you have a look at the business model of the open access journals, more than the half of them are non-APC. And most of them are SSH, of course. So most of the open access journals, they are non-APC. Why? Because they are funded, usually, supported by the libraries, supported by the faculties, supported by the universities, by the research institutions, by the state sometimes, and so on. So the situation is different. They are funded, but they are poorly funded. They don't have a lot of resources. Okay? So we have this fragmentation of small players providing full open access journals and books without having the author to pay to APCs. This is a weakness, but we think that this is also an opportunity to reclaim control over our communication system by uniting researchers, libraries, and publishers in a common effort. If we unite, then we can be strong. Now we are weak, not because we are doing nothing, but just because we are isolated, each of us. Let's unite and be strong together to provide a coordinated, well-functioning communication system which is in our control, we from the academy. How to do that? What we try to do, what we want to do with Opera, and this is our main mission, is to provide a pan-European infrastructure for open scholarly communication by integrating what we call the long tail of publication, mainly SSH, into open science. We want to do that by building a consortium of players, so integrating, including everyone who works in that field and work together as a consortium of players, by aggregating a cluster of content and giving an unified access to all this dispersed content, and by building a portfolio of services. So for the moment, not 35, but 36 partners across Europe, coming from 12 European countries, accepted to be part of the adventure and to work with the others, to cooperate with the others to fulfill this mission. So you have the list here. You see a lot of libraries, universities, publishing platforms, infrastructures, national infrastructures or local infrastructures, research institutions, and different types of players participating to this. We are supported for the moment for the development of the infrastructure by 2 H2020 projects. I'll get back more in detail about one of them, the second one, HIRMEOS, in a few minutes. Another important thing, no one is in a position in Opera Consortium, is in a position to cover all the fields of the scientific communication cycle. Because when you go from research to the final use of the publication, you have to go into different steps, okay? Which is first communication, peer reviewing, copy editing, typesetting, dissemination, marketing, and so on and so on and so on. When you have a look at the 36 partners, none of them is in a capacity to do everything. But all of them are in a capacity altogether to do everything. That's the difference. We are not Elsevier. Elsevier, they do everything, but it's one company. And that's why they dominate your system. But we together, we can unite and work together to cover the same fulfillment of the cycle by uniting. And that's the aim of Opera. Let's have a different look of Opera initiative. In many countries, you have what we call publication platforms or dissemination platforms. Maybe you know OEPEN platform. It's based in Netherlands, but it's a dissemination platform, international dissemination platform that disseminates around 5,000 open access books coming from different publishers and university presses. That's one of them. But when you go in the different countries, you see a lot of different initiatives. Ubiquity Press is another one. Do you know the EKT e-publishing platform based in Greece? Maybe not, but they exist, and they disseminate open access content as well. You know, okay, I'll try. Arčak? Yes, good, okay. Arčak in Croatia, they disseminate 450 journals open access in all disciplines. That's another publishing platform. So that's also, and of course, I can talk. I can mention our own platform, Open Edition. We have different platforms based in France to disseminate open access content as well. So the idea is that we have all these platforms and we coordinate them through the Opera's hub to provide services to the whole community. And we identified 3 main services to provide all together, which is a certification service for open access books through the directory of open access books. Maybe we can talk about it later on. To provide, and that's the most important thing, a discovery platform. Because as I said, all this content for the moment is disseminated on many platforms everywhere. So if you are a humanities researcher, you have to go in many different places to discover the content. And most of the time, you miss a lot of it because you don't even know that the EKT platform even exists. So the important thing is to build a discovery platform where all this content is indexed, where the European researcher or international researcher in the humanities and social sciences can discover this content. How do we work in Opera? As I said, we have 36 partners. We have 12 of them who are involved or committed more than the others in the development of the infrastructure, and they are part of the core group. And what they do is to coordinate working groups where all the partners work together to identify what they can do together to upgrade and improve their platform, their workflow, their business model, and the way we work and the service they deliver to the academic community. So here you have the list of the working groups. One on advocacy, because as I said, we as humanities, we need to speak with one voice. And that will change, I hope, from, from the past. Secondly, we have a group on publishing tools. So as I said, you have a lot of publishing tools. Let's share the information together about what exists in the market or in the landscape, how we can choose the same publishing tools, or how we can develop interoperability tools to make them work together. One on standards, one on business models, one on best practices, one on multilingualism, which is a specific question or challenge for our disciplines, and one for the platforms and services we want to deliver all together. The working groups, they are currently working on drafting white papers, so they are writing collaboratively white papers, and for the anecdote, they are doing that on Google Docs, which is another infrastructure we rely on, and I know it's not an ideal situation, so if you have an alternative, I'd be happy to have it. And the white papers will be presented in our first opera conference in Athens in next week. Just to finish now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about HIRMEOS, our second project, because it's a proof of concept of how we want to collaborate in operas. HIRMEOS is a very simple and very difficult project. It's highly technical. It's about taking 5 open access books platforms. So OEPEN, Open Edition Books, our platform, Göttingen University Press platform, Ubiquity Press, and ACT e-publishing platform. Oops. What happened? This was on purpose to show you about the need for infrastructure. Okay, so you take those 5 open access books platforms. All together, they publish a lot of open access books, more than 10,000 in fact. And what we do is to make those 5 platforms work together to implement added value service on top of the 5 platforms. So you mentioned PIDs, for example, at one point, unique identifiers for authors, such as ORCID, or unique identifiers for DOI for documents, such as DOI for documents. We implement them on the 5 platforms for those who don't have DOIs and ORCIDs at the moment. And we implement other services. I don't go into detail of the 5 services. I just want to make a focus on the last one, the metrics service, because Ernesto, you talked about metrics. So as you said, the metrics for the moment are currently delivered by commercial companies as a black box. It's a black box. We don't know what's inside, and they are part and judge at the same time. So what we intend to do with HIRMEOS project is to develop a metrics service for open access books, but that will be non-commercial and open, completely open. So once the project is finished, the metrics, it will be alt metrics, such as number of citations in social media, Wikipedia, and so on. But it will be also download metrics from different platforms. When the project is finished, then Opera as an infrastructure will have and will be in a position to deliver the service, not for the 5 platforms, but for the whole community, for all platforms who want to use it. Okay? And it will be, once again, open and publicly funded. That's the important thing, not a proprietary system. Conclusion now. We are in our way to build this infrastructure all together we expect more partners coming from more European countries and more international countries. And of course, it would be a delight for us to have more partners, partners coming from Slovenia as a European country. It would be really an achievement for us. We are on the road to S3. I don't go into the bureaucratic details about what is S3. S3 stands for European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructures. In fact, S3 is a forum where you have delegates from all the governments, the research ministries from the 28 countries, European countries, and they establish a roadmap to select the future infrastructure, research infrastructure, that can be supported, that will be supported financially by the European Commission and by the member states to provide those services that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mounier. Any question about this very interesting development? Yes, please.
Can I ask you a question, or maybe it's more of a comment? Awesome. It's more of a comment, but maybe you can share your thoughts on this. In the past, we saw quite a number of initiatives, scholarly-led initiatives in the field of open access, and at some point, some of them were bought out by the big business, big companies. It is a nature of capitalism society that the best initiatives are somehow as a model bought up and then used by the big publishers, let's say so. Are there any safety measures or within the operas initiative, how these things would not happen to operas or other initiatives led by the different members? Thank you.
So, first level, I cannot answer for the 36 initiatives participating to opera because they have their autonomy. Okay, most of them they are publicly funded. They are not startups. Okay, so we can imagine that they won't be bought by big commercial companies in the future, but there is no guarantee on that. Now, about opera, there is a guarantee that opera will not be bought or mainly influenced, even mainly influenced by big commercial publisher because of S3. That's why we want to be labeled as an S3. Because when you are on the S3 roadmap, in fact, the final aim of the development of the infrastructure is to set up a legal entity, a European legal entity, and the members of the legal entity are not organizations, but they are the member states. So here, I'm sorry to talk about politics because it's about policy and politics. Here, the political lock-in is that the member states will fund and will keep their hands on the governance of this pan-European research infrastructure. That's in the statutes, okay? And I think your question is really, really important, and that's why we want to be, because otherwise we could say, okay, we are a bunch of friends, partners, and we can develop our own infrastructure our own way without bothering with this S3, which is very heavy, S3 procedure, and trying to find funding elsewhere and so on. But no, we want to be an S3 for this reason, because we want to lock our governance for the public interest and not be bought in the future by commercial companies. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll move on and continue discussion after the break. Žal naslednji gost se nam ni mogel pridružiti zaradi nenadne bolezni v družini. Je pa vseeno imamo njegovo predavanje, ki ga bomo predvajali preko posnetka. To je gospod Martin Donnelly, ki je sodelavec pri Digital Curation Center na Univerzi v Edinburgu, mednarodno uveljavljenemu centru za digitalizacijo, s poudarkom na izgradnji infrastrukture in pridobivanju veščin za upravljanje z raziskovalnimi podatki. Preden se je gospod Martin Donnelly pridružil Univerzi v Edinburgu, je deloval kot tehnološki ocenjevalec in mentor predavatelj na Inštitutu za tehnološke informacijske znanosti na Univerzi v Glasgowu. Ukvarja se za načrtovanje upravljanja podatkov, je zunanji strokovni ocenjevalec projektov od Evropske komisije za upravljanje s podatki, član odbora Digital Preservation Coalitions Communications and Advocacy, in član Inštituta za trajnostni razvoj programske opreme.
Good morning, or possibly good afternoon, as it may be by now in Ljubljana. My name is Martin Donnelly. I currently represent the Digital Curation Centre at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I'm going to be speaking today about data and openness in the arts and humanities. And apologies for the fact that I'm not there in person. This is what I normally look like for those of you who haven't come across me before, and this is what I currently look like. Unfortunately, I'm at home with a 4-year-old who has chickenpox, and I'm very sorry not to be present in Ljubljana. It's an event I was very much looking forward to, and apologies also to the organisers who went to great trouble to get me to come to Ljubljana, so I'm very sorry for not being there in person. What I'm going to talk about today is research data management and open data trends, which have been fairly hot topics in scholarly communications over recent years. I'm going to talk a little bit about their roots and the differences that the arts and humanities have, which are relevant around open access, open science, research data management, all these kinds of things. There are terminological issues for sure around terms like data and terms like science, which is not the same as research. But there are also strengths that the arts and humanities bring, and there are also fundamental differences between what arts and creative research is attempting to do and what scientific research is attempting to do, and I hope to be able to explore some of them during the course of the next 20 or 25 minutes. I'll end with a little bit of a discussion about the direction that I think that research policy or research outputs management policy, to be specific, is going, and some suggestions on what we can do in order to make things better. So open access, it was the first of the open things to really come to widespread attention. That is specifically open access to research publications, to the scholarly record. The intention behind open access was to speed up the research process, to provide people with a way to access online journals as quickly as possible without waiting for the traditional paper-based publishing model to whir around, and also to remove barriers to engagement with research, to open it up to anyone who was interested, not only those with access to a research library. And as open access to publications became established, managing research data became the next hot topic in scientific communications. Effectively, that was the deliberate and mindful management of the evidence which underpins the claims which are made in open access publications. And in time, managing research data has morphed terminologically and indeed in terms of its support into open data, although it's definitely worth remembering that managed data is not necessarily open. These two terms are not synonymous. But nonetheless, taken together, open access publications and open data have combined towards a newer term called, frequently called open science, although for reasons that I'll go into just now, I prefer the term open research, but open science is the term that has the most traction at the moment. So if you add open access and open data together with things like the use of open source software, the use of open reproducible workflows, with open notebooks, so that your working methods are clear and transparent, then these combine towards something called open science. And indeed, the EU has been explicit about moving towards an open science type agenda for some years now. Their open access and open data policies, their open data policy in particular, is now arranged according to the FAIR principles, which state that data and metadata should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These are laudable aims for sure, but they are expressed in fairly science-centric language. And of course, Horizon 2020 research is not only carried out in the sciences, there's also arts and humanities research carried out under that framework programme as well. So my starting point would be to say that is it any wonder that people in the arts and humanities may feel marginalised or disengaged from the open access, open data, open science conversation. So in preparing this presentation, I dug out some old slides of mine. I was interested in the kind of history of open access and open science. And this is a timeline slide I put together a couple of years ago on open access and data sharing. And it starts off in 1987 with an early example of an open access journal all the way up to 2012, which is when the European Commission first became explicit in recognising data as being an output of research which was worthy of equal treatment to publications. Until then, really, publications were the only thing that was important, and the data was not treated with a great deal of care. But the timings are less important than some of the words that jumped out at me while I was looking at this slide. One of the earliest drivers for data sharing came from the US Office of Science and Technology Policy, and one of the earliest references to data sharing or open data in Europe came from the Scientific Council of the European Research Council. The fact is that these words are often treated synonymously at a European level. However, certainly to a native English speaker, the terms research and science are not synonymous. Furthermore, when somebody from the arts and humanities hears the term science, they tend to switch off very quickly because they recognise, possibly falsely, that what is being talked about is not their work. It's not the kind of thing that they are involved in. Because scientific research and arts and humanities research are not necessarily concerned with the same goals. The scientific method, according to Wikipedia, is a body of techniques for investigating phenomena, acquiring knowledge. It's based on empirical and measurable evidence, and so on. Whereas art methodologies differ. They're not necessarily about establishing truth. And indeed, the word truth and things like facts and reality can be contentious issues in the arts and humanities. The goal of art is expression, communication of things which may be intangible, such as ideas and feelings and perceptions. So the journey can be as important in art as the results are and the evidence in science. So there's certainly differences here, but I like to think that there are common ground. These two paths, if you like, diverge from one another, but they do crisscross at some key junctures, and I hope to identify some of those crossings today. So I thought it would be useful to start to define things. There is a tendency in research data, in fact, in policy in general, to be overly prescriptive in definitions. And something I'm quite interested in at the moment is trying to be a bit looser about definitions and not to pin things down. So that's why I went to the dictionary and started to look things up. So data is described as facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. And immediately at this point, the humanities scholar starts to hear alarm bells because they're not necessarily interested in facts or statistics. They're interested in perceptions or ideas, possibly. And then the secondary definition talks about quantities, characters or symbols performed by a computer which may be stored and transmitted. That's good because it's starting to say that not all data is factual. It's something which is processed by a computer. But then again, in the arts and indeed in certain areas of the sciences, not all research data, not all research outputs are created in a digital environment. In the arts and the creative arts in particular, there is likely to be lots of analog sketchbooks and things like that. Similarly, in the sciences, lots of lab books may be handwritten. In anthropology, lots of notes may be handwritten. So tying things down to the digital is again not entirely inclusive. We drill down from data to facts. A fact is a thing that is known or proved to be true, and there are difficulties about truth in the arts and humanities, as I'll show in the next slide. Truth is something which is true or in accordance with fact or reality, and reality is the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. And indeed, it's these kind of ideas, these ideals, and these notions that art is often fundamentally concerned with. So I pulled out some quotes which kind of turn these definitions on their heads from an arts and humanities standpoint, which I fairly unapologetically represent. A historian which I went to help once to produce a data management plan called me and said, "Can I come and help? I've been asked to produce a data management plan," said this researcher, "but I don't have any data." And then he thinks and says, "Well, unless you count my databases, I suppose." And I said, "Well, yes, your databases are very much the data which your data management plan should be describing." And he said, "But these are not facts. These are perceptions. These are witness accounts from various things. They're completely biased, etc., etc." And he proceeded to talk more about the dictionary definition of data than the meaning which the funder in question really wanted this to be done for. So again, the terminology can be a barrier. Facts. Heraclitus, the philosopher, said you could not step twice into the same river, and it's the same thing with data and with experience, with human experience. That it's something which is either captured or described once, but may very well change. And how somebody feels about something one day may very well be different to the way in which they feel about that same thing on another day. So there are issues here with objective, immutable truth, and indeed with fairly flighty perception. Truth. That there's a very famous couple of verses of the Bible where Christ, in his kind of trial in front of Pilate, says, "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me," and Pilate says, "Truth, what is that?" A very short and wry way of saying that power establishes what is true, not anything which is above and beyond the human realm, and that again speaks to things like policy and speaks to things like drivers in terms of research funder policy or research publisher policy, which are far more persuasive to some branches of researcher than others. And in terms of reality, Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, talks about the relationship between life and death, between shadows and the things that cast them. He says, "Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is my true substance." This is a meditation on perception and saying that what we experience may in fact not be real. Now, lots of scientists would turn their noses up at this because they're not particularly attuned to these philosophical or indeed metaphysical conversations. But there is a good quote which I like to pull out at this point, which is Edward Ng, when he says that in science, one man's noise is another man's signal. This is a useful quote that I turn to when thinking about differing viewpoints. A frequent objection to data sharing, which I hear a lot from researchers, is that there's no point in sharing my data. Not that I can't share my data, but there's no point because nobody else will understand it, or it will be useless to them. And my response to that is usually something along the lines of, well, one man's noise is another man's signal. You simply don't know what somebody else will make out of the things that you produce or leave behind. And that kind of reusability for a different purpose is something which is kind of stitched into art in a way that it's not stitched into science, but I think that science can learn from art in this regard. A piece of work which I undertook along with a couple of colleagues from the DCC some years ago was to try and define the term data for creative research. And we started by looking at existing definitions of research data. And the first one we found was a science-centric definition, which came from the US Office of Management and Budget. It said that research data was the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community as necessary to validate research findings. And obviously that doesn't really work for the arts. We're not dealing with facts. And it also makes reference to the scientific community, which is a turn-off to people from the arts. But then another definition came up from the visual arts, which described research data as evidence, which is a nice strong word, which is used or created to generate new knowledge and interpretations. Interpretation is a very important word here. Now, it goes on to say that evidence may be intersubjective or subjective, physical or emotional, persistent or ephemeral, personal or public, explicit or tacit, and it may be consciously or unconsciously referenced by the researcher at some point during the course of their research. Now, managing intersubjective, physical, persistent, public data, which is made explicit, is considerably easier than doing it for the opposites there, subjective evidence, which is emotional, ephemeral, which is personal, which is tacit, which is unconsciously referenced. How is that actually managed? It's the answer, quite simply, is it isn't. But data, I think, can be broadly defined as anything which can be used to validate or reproduce or replicate a research conclusion or enrich understanding of the research process. Something which is produced over the course of research, which helps to prove its benefits, its utility, and indeed which can be used to disprove the same thing. So I pulled out some examples here of science-centric language. A definition of research data management as being the active management and appraisal of data over the life cycle of scholarly and scientific interest. A question from Nicole Yance a couple of years ago, which asked whether withholding data was simply bad science, or should it fall under scientific misconduct? And then later in the lead for this blog post, she talks about professional standards in research, but obviously the headline writer went with science because, well, for the headline writer's own reasons. The European Commission, a couple of years ago, spoke of moving beyond open access towards the more inclusive area of open science. I like the fact that they used the term inclusive and science in the same sentence without talking too much about research, although that does come in later. And in the FAIR principles I mentioned earlier, which are used as the kind of framework for the open data pilot and open data guidelines by Horizon 2020 are very much explicitly for scientific data management, although they are implemented more broadly than that. So moving on to some strengths and weaknesses around data in the arts and humanities, I would suggest that there's nothing new about data. You know, the purpose of research data management really is safety and reuse for validating and replicating research processes, or indeed assuring their quality. There's nothing new about reusing sources in the arts and humanities because it's an integral part of the culture, the artistic method, and it always has been. Shakespeare's plots, only one of them really was original. Julia Kristeva coined the term intertextuality, which suggested that all texts were related in a galaxy of signification, which is something which came originally from the French theorist Roland Barthes. Duchamp, his famous fountain piece was a reuse of somebody else's ceramic, shall we say. T.S. Eliot used fragments from all sorts of different places. Talent borrows, genius steals. More modernly, DJ culture is all about reusing sources to make something new. Collage, intermediate art, all the same thing. But it's more fraught than data reuse in other areas, so often because sources are effectively plagiarized, and plagiarism is not the great sin in the arts that it is in the scientists. The referencing and valuing systems may be considerably different, and I think it's fairly self-evident that some characteristics of the data, in inverted commas, which the arts and humanities use and reuse do require a different kind of handling, a different kind of sensitivity from those in other disciplines. So to start with, if we think back to the methodologies slide that I showed earlier, the data which emerges in the arts is as likely, possibly more likely, to be an output of the research process as an input to a workflow. And that's something which in the UK, the Arts and Humanities Research Council has been quite clear about for some time, although it's not something which has caught on yet with their scientific counterparts, the more science-centric research councils. In the UK, we have a bewildering number of research councils. There are, in fact, 7 public ones, all organised around disciplinary bases, but the Arts and Humanities Research Council is the only arts one. Practice and praxis-based research is more or less the sole preserve of the humanities, and indeed the methods are not always rigorously methodical, they're not always linear, and that is at odds with the scientific approach. We're not dealing with truth, we're not dealing with a methodology so much as a method in many cases. The data which is produced in arts research may often be personal. It may, in fact, not be factual in nature, but what is more important is not the content itself, but its arrangement and the quality of expression. And that tends to be the reason why open access publications embargoes are longer in the arts and humanities than in the sciences. However, there is commonality. What do arts and science data have in common? Both may be financially valuable, and indeed arts data is often much more financially valuable than scientific data, and indeed it's very precious to its creators or its owner/parents, because researchers in both areas do feel a kind of parental or proprietary relationship over their data. And in fact, persuading people in the arts to share is not difficult. They're used to sharing. In fact, they're often used to oversharing. So I'm going to try and conclude. Hopefully I'm not going I won't go too long over my allocated time, and talk a little bit about policy directions. The Wellcome Trust, which is a medical funder based in the UK, has adopted recently a more holistic approach towards research outputs, and I think this is something which is interesting, and I think it's something which I hope other funders and indeed Europe take heed of, that is to have a more inclusive policy towards research outputs, and indeed I hope secondarily that they also adopt a more open and generic set of terminology in order that they don't fall back onto terms like open science, when open research would do just as well and would not alienate people. So what Wellcome did was they have replaced their former individual policies on open access and open data with a single policy on data, software and materials management. And it's interesting that they also included non-digital data in the shape of analog materials, things like samples. And that I think is relevant to the arts as well, because it acknowledges that not everything is digital, but making available and sharing non-digital data, especially when it may have a personal element to it, as it will in many cases in the arts, is far more difficult than sharing uncontroversial scientific factual material. And hot off the press, last month, the European Commission issued a new recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. Now, it's not great that they talk about scientific information, but it is good that they take a more holistic approach to what they call scientific information. This new recommendation addresses all components of open science, including open access, data, software and hardware in a holistic approach. So just to wrap up, what can we do in order to try and take this conversation forward and to make sure that we don't alienate people who would be usefully involved in it? We must be careful with our terminology. We must be clear that this is shorthand. It's not a dictionary definition, but it's shorthand for a variety of scholarly and research products and byproducts and outputs. We should not use science when we mean research. We should use science when we mean science, and we should challenge people who do. I'm always fond of the German word Wissenschaft, which removes that issue because it basically means scholarship, and that's or knowledge and craft, and it's quite useful. But unfortunately, English doesn't have a Wissenschaft equivalent. I think that if we focus more on talking about research outputs as opposed to publications or data or samples or whatever, if we organise our provision to support researchers in managing their outputs, then we can overcome some of the lack of engagement that we've previously encountered. And I wonder whether there's a case to be made for being deliberately more vague in our policies and in the way in which we support things, in order that it meets, that it's aligned with the spirit of scholarship as opposed to ever tighter definitions. I do think in the arts we need to be mindful of the sometimes blurred lines between professional investigation and personal expression, and I think that it's very important to understand the concerns of researchers in all kinds of areas. I would suggest that anyone involved in supporting research in the arts and humanities, or indeed in the sciences, takes time to talk to researchers, to understand their methods, understand their needs, and to help to assuage fears that they may have or concerns they may have about pointlessness. We must be gentle when introducing policies. There's no point in being too hard or too heavy in policy when the audience is not ready for it yet. We must also be mindful that the drivers behind research data management in the arts will be different to those in the sciences. If we focus more on things like preservation, which they tend to be quite into, on reuse, on scholarly quality, rather than things like speed or efficiency or value for money or return on investment, then that might be a fruitful strategy. Research is not normally a matter of life or death in the arts. Art improves lives rather than saving them. And it is important to build bridges between research support professionals and the researchers they exist to support before they're needed, so that you get into a situation where you are trusted and there's mutual respect between the parties. So I would suggest that doing this before any increasingly stringent policies were introduced would be a fruitful approach. So that's it from me. I'm going to circulate these slides, and they have on them some I hope useful links to some recent events and initiatives. The Cultural Heritage Data Reuse Charter mission statement brings together some of the big hitters in European arts and humanities and digital humanities cultural heritage scholarship. There was a recent survey of galleries, libraries, archives and museums' open access policies, which I was very pleased to see covers not only open access to publications but also data and related resources. And there was an interesting conference last month at UCL Qatar on research data management in digital humanities, and some of the outputs of that will be worth having a look at. I've included some resources here, a lot of which I was at least partly responsible for, and end with a couple of slides about the Foster project, which is a European infrastructure training project that I am currently a member of, but which unfortunately does utilise the terminology open science, although the first thing that I say whenever I'm giving a presentation for Foster is that it should really be open research, but that I wasn't responsible for the acronym. So If you'd like to get in touch, if you have any follow-ups from this, I'd be very happy to hear from you. My contact details are there. Again, I'd like to wish you the very best for this event. I am again sorry not to be able to be there, and I hope that this remote presentation is at least better than nothing. So thank you very much.
Ni šlo za prenos, ampak je bil posnetek. Tako da s tem smo zaključili ta del programa. Zahvalil bi se še enkrat obema predavateljama, oziroma vsem trem predavateljem. Thank you very much for your interesting presentations. Zdaj sledi odmor za kavo, 20 minut, ob enih bi pa potem nadaljevali z spravo in kratkimi predstavitvami. Hvala lepa.